Part 25. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 247. Have they gone out? I always feel that Xiao Sun's previous exploration was still a bit wrong. If according to Xiao Sun's words, that man's strength is similar to ours, he shouldn't be so stupid, nor so naive. A deep voice came from the communicator, with a kind of top-down contempt. Obviously, it can be seen from the tone that although he is in the same team, this person does not think highly of Sun Heron and others. Treat them completely as a starting point for the next level. This is also normal. When horror broadcast arranges team relationships, the probability of strong people and strong people forming a stronger team is still relatively small. The strength gap in most teams is still obvious. After all, the team at that time, everyone could not browse the enhancement level and strength level on the internet to invite each other to form a team. This is a story world set in an entire city and its suburbs. Most of the audience still had a certain amount of luck in forming a team. Inside, sometimes we really couldn't find 5 people, so we would hold our noses and accept others, trying our best to fill up the team quota. Subai and Suqing were special situations, and they were still very different from other teams. Moreover, there are still relatively few teams like Subai's previous team and Suqing's previous team where the 5 teammates have a relatively even strength level and do not feel that others are cheating. I haven't gone out. I have monitored all the civilian and public cameras around this house and found no signs of them leaving. They should still be inside. However, they should be alert. I am about to crack the surveillance system on them. When they were using their cell phones, they actually turned them off, so I guess they guessed my presence, so everyone should be careful. This voice was a little childish, and the speaker must be young, but there was an old-fashioned feeling in his tone. It was obvious that his status in the team was not low. Xiao Sun, you 3 block the back door. Don't go in. Just stay in the yard. Xian and I are going to go in. There are only 2 of them. We have an advantage in numbers. We shouldn't have a big problem in winning. You find the right opportunity and snatch the pregnant woman out if you can. This is the first voice. Obviously, the Xian he is talking about is the man who can control the surrounding network. Xian had already reached the front door. He lowered his headset and said, I'll scan it with an infrared detector. This distance should be enough. Guo Chang, please wait for me. Okay, haha, it's so convenient to have you. Guo Chang carried an iron sword behind his back, and the clothes on his body were very thin. He looked like an ascetic warrior, but his whole person revealed a sharp aura. Like a piece of fine steel that has been forged red. However, soon, a strange voice came from Xian. It's strange. What's wrong? Guo Cheng asked. I just saw the scan results of a pregnant woman lying on the bed in the master bedroom. There was no sign of the other 2 people. Have you already withdrawn first? Guo Cheng, if finding a pregnant woman is such a simple matter, do we still need to snatch it from others? Xian asked, meaning how could the other party be willing to let go so easily? Forget it, stop scanning, go in and take a look. The soldiers will come to cover up the water and the earth. If they are there, they will see the real seal. If they are not, then it will be ours to take away the pregnant woman. Xian nodded, I'll go in through the front door, you go in through the back door. Guo Cheng relaxed his neck, and then rushed forward. The door was knocked away, but he was unable to enter the house because there was a person waiting for him behind the door. Subai looked at the man who ran directly into his arms, with a look of disgust on his face. Then evil energy burst out from his body, he closed his arms and held this guy directly in his arms, like a python treating its prey. Same, hang him. Guo Cheng was thinking about scolding his mother. The scan over there just said that there was no one in the room, but the person was actually standing behind the door waiting for him. What kind of no one is this? In fact, Guo Cheng mistakenly blamed Xian. After all, Subai is now in a zombie state and is an absolutely cold-blooded animal. Naturally, the infrared sensor cannot detect it. Subai exerted force on his arms, and his whole body tensed up. The person in his arms was already wailing, and at the same time there was a snapping sound in the joints. A sense of satisfaction originating from his heart emerged. This was a different kind from the thrill of shooting an enemy with a Hellfire shotgun. Is a kind of confidence that comes from deep within oneself. The difference between the two feelings is a bit like the feeling of one going in with a condom and the other feeling coming in and out without a condom. However, Guo Cheng immediately reacted and responded after getting through the initial pain. The iron sword behind him trembled, flew out automatically, and cut into Subai's arms. A string of sparks flew out from the place where the iron sword came into contact with Subai's arm. Subai's upper body was shaken by this, and he couldn't help but let go of Guo Cheng and retreated. Guo Cheng was unyielding, so he took the iron sword and stabbed Subai directly. Subai immediately stabilized his body, put his palms together, and clamped Guo Cheng's iron sword. Wow! With a long series of harsh friction sounds, the iron sword kept passing through Subai's palms, but finally stopped 10 centimeters away from Subai's face, and it was difficult to make any progress. Guo Cheng gritted his teeth and looked at his iron sword. He pursed his lips, as if he was reciting some spell. The iron sword began to turn red. Even in the zombie state, Subai could feel it on his palms at this time. A burning feeling. Taking a deep breath, the accessories on Subai's body bloomed with blue light. The cold poison exploded and completely dispersed. The back door corridor was instantly frozen, and ice picks appeared on the doorframe. Guo Cheng couldn't help but shiver. The temperature of the iron sword dropped instantly, and a layer of frost seemed to have solidified, covering Subai's palms. Grass. Guo Cheng cursed, took a few steps back, lost his iron sword, and quickly exited the room. The hand holding the sword had developed frostbite and was festering. Subai opened his hands, and the frozen iron sword fell to the ground. Then, Subai walked out slowly. Perhaps, the old man is right. He has such a good bloodline, and he did rely too much on the Hellfire shotgun in the past. Even if his bloodline cannot be redeemed and upgraded from Wadian, he cannot take the initiative to explore and improve it. What? Sun Hairan, Zhang Hua, and Qian Shijun all stood not far behind Guo Cheng. Looking at Subai who came out, the three of them swallowed subconsciously. They had only told Xian and Guo Cheng that Subai had two things. It was a very powerful gun, but they themselves did not expect that even if they did not rely on firearms, Subai's strength could not be underestimated. When Subai and Sun Hairan were together, they had never used bloodline, so Sun Hairan and the others didn't know very well how many trump cards Subai had. You guys, go in through the side room window and take the pregnant woman out. Leave her to me to deal with, Guo Cheng shouted. Sun Hairan and the others were just about to leave when Subai glanced over with a smile on his face. A zombie smiled at you. You definitely didn't feel much warmth, but instead made your scalp numb. 7 stars march on, and 10,000 swords return to the clan. Guo Cheng crossed his fingers and raised his arms. From his back, 7 bloody swords spurted out with a strange brilliance. In an instant, the blood sword stabbed directly at Subai. The speed was so fast that it was so messy that Subai couldn't catch the trace of the blood sword at all. He could only rely on his feeling to punch out with his fists, and smashed them away with evil fists. There were 2 blood swords, but there were 5 blood swords, which directly penetrated Subai's body. It was not a penetration in the physical sense, but the damage was even more terrifying. Subai knelt on the ground, black blood spilled from the corner of his mouth, and his face was twisted, looking extremely painful. Guo Cheng's face didn't look very good either. These 7 blood swords were his origin. Using his own origin to fight meant killing 1,000 enemies and damaging 800. Subai tightened his lips and breathed heavily. Then, when Guo Cheng rearranged the 7 blood swords, Subai stood up suddenly and let out a long roar. The zombie bloodline instantly switched to the vampire bloodline. The whole person turned into a shadow and quickly drifted away. Whoosh! The 7 blood swords pierced through Subai's shadow again, and Subai's shadow became almost extremely dim. Obviously, even in a coping state, he could not stop the blood swords from harming him, but Subai relied on this forcefully. A wave of momentum floated directly in front of Guo Cheng, and the shadow enveloped Guo Cheng. Take it, sleep it, stop it. Guo Chengqi summoned the blood sword again and turned it into a defense around him. His face was determined and his heart was calm. The blood sword has a great bonus to the damage effect of evil things like Subai. He knew that, Subai soon couldn't hold on any longer, and when the time came, he would still be the winner. Subai's wanton roar came from the shadows, like the roar of a trapped animal before it died, with a torrent of unwillingness, anger, madness. Regardless of costs. All kinds of negative emotions boiled up in Subai's heart, and at the same time, they were also revealed. This is the emotion aroused by a person when he is at the end of his rope. However, at this moment, the shadow was gradually becoming solid. Turn around. Guo Cheng's blood sword began to dim and shrink. How could this happen? How could this happen? Guo Cheng muttered to himself in a panic. Subai was also shocked. He didn't expect that he could actually produce such an effect with his own shadow. There was no need to condense his body and use his fangs to suck blood. It is actually possible to forcibly absorb the vitality from the wrapped things in a plundering manner by directly relying on the corresponding state. Really? That old man was right, he used to rely on hellfire shotguns to survive, and his unique mutant physique was really wasted. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 248. Guo Cheng's 7 blood swords have turned into 7 blood daggers. This shows how much life essence he has absorbed by Subai. Subai now feels as comfortable as lying on the bed after taking a sauna. It was as if every pore in his body was relaxing at this moment, and his whole body felt indescribably comfortable. This is actually a way to tap into one's own potential. Relying on one's own stimulation and insights from fighting, one can tap out one's own bloodline step by step. Moreover, Subai felt that this way of promotion was certainly more valuable than exchanging money directly from Wadian. It is more difficult, but in terms of combat effectiveness, it is much more powerful than those redeemed directly from WeChat stores. Just like climbing a mountain, some people take the cable car directly and then take the cable car off. It seems that they have climbed the mountain, but it can only be regarded as being here. Some people are accustomed to a pair of hiking shoes and a trekking pole, climbing up and down the mountain step by step on their own strength. After a lot of hard work, they can take in all the scenery along the way and measure it with their own feet. After crossing the entire mountain, the insights and experiences can only be known to those who have truly experienced it themselves. In the past, Subai could not obtain direct redemption from the WeChat store because of his bloodline, so the development and mining of his bloodline had always been in a passive state. And since Subai obtained the Hellfire shotgun, to a certain extent, which made Subai further ignore his own bloodline. It was only now that Subai experienced a pleasure that was completely different from using the Hellfire shotgun. For example, although humans have now flown away from the Earth and can go to the moon, in human society, it is similar to sumo wrestling and wrestling. The movement is still enduring. Tapping people's own potential and experiencing the power that belongs to people without borrowing external objects has always been something that all mankind enjoys. Guo Cheng opened his eyes at this time. His eyes were dim, even dim, as if he was about to die soon. However, his heart was filled with a deep reluctance. His own strengthening and hard work, at this moment, actually became the nourishment of his enemy, and was robbed away by the enemy in such a way. Even Lei Feng probably would not be willing to use such a way at this time. Way to selfless dedication. Use my soul to light my sword, and use my name to shape my sword. Guo Cheng's eyebrows cracked, and blood gurgled out, but soon, a small grey sword flew out from it. This was Guo Cheng's soul sword, and it was his most fundamental existence. You can suck my blood and essence, then I want to see if you can suck my soul. The burst of the soul sword caused Sudbai's sea of consciousness to turbulence and tumble, because Sudbai was in the form of a shadow at this time and had no specific physical manifestation. Similarly, and therefore, his soul was not present at this time. Unable to receive protection from his own body, when Guo Cheng's soul sword is activated, it can directly affect and kill Sudbai's soul. How dare you resist? From the depths of Sudbai's soul, a violent emotion was conveyed. Sudbai was no stranger to this kind of emotion, because every time he got sick, this kind of emotion would be involuntarily aroused from the depths of his heart, giving him the urge to flip the table involuntarily. The reason why Sudbai believes that this is not a disease, but his own nature, is because of this. This is a call from the depths of his soul, and it is the true and purest version of himself. Moreover, since absorbing the drop of blood essence of a high-level vampire given to him by Fatty, Sudbai's bloodline has also been branded with that vampire. It is an existence that is almost immortal until the body collapses. Putting his body in a dynamic balance of destruction and regeneration, he finally had to ask the church to sacrifice 2 cardinal archbishops before he was completely handed over to God for judgment. The character of this kind of character is inherently arrogant, and Sudbai also has this kind of character. The fusion of the two has contributed to Sudbai's originally mentally ill state of mind becoming normal. Transformation is tantamount to further tearing off Sudbai's original disguise. It is your honor for me to drink your blood. How can you resist? Why do you dare to resist? Roar. The shadow doubled in size at this time, and there was a faint evil spirit gushing out from it. The zombie bloodline and the vampire bloodline actually formed a strange collusion at this time. The evil spirit was like a file, constantly rubbing against the soul sword, causing Guo Cheng's 7 orifices to bleed, and his whole body was almost like a candle in the wind, unable to continue to support him. Sun Hairan and a few others had been standing nearby. Originally, they planned to go into the house first and steal the pregnant woman out, but in the blink of an eye, their boss fell into such a passive situation, which made them seem to be in a dilemma. If Guo Cheng after being killed by Sudbai, can the 3 of them take the pregnant woman away from Sudbai? Are these 3 of them qualified? However, if they continue to stay here, they are helpless. Sudbai has become a shadow and has no specific form. Sun Hairan has double spears. Qian Shujun and Zhang Hua have also strengthened their physical attacks. Their levels are not high. For the situation in front of them, I want to help, but I don't know how to help. If they mess around and shoot at the shadow together, they probably won't hurt Sudbai, but will kill Guo Cheng, who is already on the verge of collapse. This is also because the level of Sudbai and Guo Cheng's current fight has exceeded a certain level. It is difficult for people at lower levels to intervene. It completely exceeds the boundaries of quantity and quality. I give up, you are cruel, you are powerful, everyone takes a step back and let me go, otherwise, the fish will die and the net will fall apart. Guo Cheng's sharp roar came out, with a kind of determination and anger. Obviously, he was planning to retreat, because if he continued, he might really die here. However, from his words, it seemed that he was still alive. There is a trump card that can perish together with Sudbai. As for whether it is true or false, it is for Sudbai to consider it himself. You are not qualified to negotiate terms with me. How could Sudbai, who was enjoying the pleasure of sucking and plundering, give up just because of a few words from the other party? Wealth is sought in danger. In the world of stories, Sometimes we have to go to the Tiger Mountain even though we know that there are tigers in the mountain. Not to mention that nowadays, the other party can survive just by saying a few words. Can Subai give up the remaining essence and blood? Impossible, absolutely impossible. For this result, Guo Cheng seemed to have expected it. His face had already turned grey, almost like a dying person. However, the next moment, veins began to show all over his body, a sense of determination. The breath is revealed. The 7 blood swords that had been reduced to the size of a thumb merged together instantly to form a new blood sword. Then, the soul sword and the blood sword merged into one, and they began to tremble together. After a breath. Explode. Boom. The horrific explosion, although the scope of the explosion was not very large, just a circle with a radius of less than 3 meters, Sun Hairan and the others only felt that their eyes lit up and they were indirectly blinded, but they recovered quickly, and there was not much. It was uncomfortable, but everything in that circular area turned into smoke and dust. The land was so flat that it was beyond description, as if God took a pair of scissors and cut a piece from here. Dead, Zhang Hua said in disbelief. They should be dead. They both died together. Qian Shijun also pursed his lips. Damn it, they're dead, let's go get the pregnant woman out first. Sun Hairan made a decision at this time and immediately took the lead to rush into the room. Zhang Hua and Qian Shijun also came to their senses immediately and followed them together. The 3 of them passed through the back door, but Qian Shijun, who was walking at the back, suddenly stopped and shouted, "Hey, what color was this door before? How do I remember that it should be green, not red?" Sun Hairan's chest rose and fell. No matter what, the pregnant woman is in the master bedroom, come with me. However, at this moment, the blood on the door began to squirm, and slowly dripped and splashed. Some sticky blood fell on Qian Shijun and Zhang Hua, making the 2 people a little panicked. Sun Hairan stopped talking at this time, because a drop of thick red fell on his eyebrows. Is this paint? Qian Shijun said in disbelief. He had the most dripping on it, and his upper body almost seemed to be soaked in it. The smell of blood is very strong. This is blood. Sun Hairan frowned. Suddenly, there were continuous explosions outside. It was obviously Su Qing's fight with Ah Xian. There is another person on the other side. We can't delay any longer. Let's get the pregnant woman first. Before Sun Hairan could finish his sentence, he suddenly let out a scream, and his nose sank directly. No, to be precise. A kind of fusion, the drop of blood that fell on the tip of his nose kept corroding like sulfuric acid. At this time, Qian Shijun and Zhang Hua also screamed, but their pain was shorter. Because there was so much paint on their bodies, most of their bodies were melted away in almost an instant. On the ground, the blood donation area began to expand continuously. Sun Hairan knelt on the ground. He felt as uncomfortable as he wanted now. This was a kind of torture, a terrible torture. The problem was that he couldn't die soon. This was the most painful thing. In the blood, a figure of a person slowly emerged. Soon, a human face emerged from the blood. He looked at Sun Hairan, who was kneeling in front of him in great pain, with a smile on his face. A pleasant smile, as if enjoying an interesting play. It's really pleasing to the eye. Sun Hairan stretched out his hand with helplessness and fear. But Subai, who came out of the bloody water, didn't care. He stretched out one hand and held Sun Hairan's head, pinning his whole body into the bloody water. Immediately, Sun Hairan was completely integrated into it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 249. The life essence of the 3 people has been completely integrated into this large pool of blood, and then turned into the nutrients Subai needs, and is absorbed by Subai. This is the rhythm of the vampire clan, and it is also the horror of the vampire clan. Guo Cheng's self-destruction really threatened Subai, almost disintegrating Subai's body, and finally turned into red solidified on the doorframe. However, if Guo Cheng had used self-destruction from the beginning, with the 7 intact blood swords and the traction of the soul sword, Subai would not be able to survive at all. But the key is that Guo Cheng did not do this, because at that time he felt that he would lose, and he didn't think that he would lose. When he knew that he was going to lose, it was already too late. He lost the origins of nearly 6 blood swords, and Subai absorbed the origins of these 6 blood swords. In addition, the soul swords were also worn away by Subai's evil aura. Next, Guo Cheng finally died together, which became a so-called wishful thinking. Even, due to a strange combination of circumstances, he helped Subai get an opportunity and a blessing. When Guo Cheng blew himself up, Subai was in a state of response. His body turned into a black mist and was already in a dispersed state. After the explosion, Subai's whole body was screened and eliminated at once. The impurities disappeared, and what was left was the complete essence. This was also the reason why Subai had accumulated enough. You have to know how many supplements Subai had taken and how many opportunities he had encountered since he exchanged for the ruined vampire bloodline. Brain, Jiangsu's heart, high-level vampire essence and blood, etc. In the end, something like the explosion just now formed a kind of sublimation. The drops of red that stain the facade are the purest Subai and the most real Subai. The vampire race is a race that lives on blood. Their long lifespan and terrifying body self-healing ability make them have an indissoluble bond with blood. Everything about them comes from blood. Their future and shall go in blood. Of course, the luckiest thing was that when Subai needed nutritional supplements the most, Sun Heiran and the others happened to pass by the door and delivered nutrients and supplements to him. It would be too disrespectful to refuse to accept it. Standing up in the blood, his newly formed body was a little weak and his steps seemed a little weak, but Subai did not feel dissatisfied at all. In fact, his heart was filled with a kind of ecstasy. On the ground, there were still clothes and shoes belonging to Sun Heiran, Qian Shujun, and Zhang Hua, showing a silent irony. Subai continued to walk forward and took out 2 Hellfire shotguns from a mezzanine in the corridor. Before, Subai's plan was that if he could not defeat the opponent with his own bloodline, he could at least retreat. Secondly, coming back and holding the Hellfire shotgun again can be regarded as a way out, but it was also because I had been in a state of anger before, so I forgot about this incident. Perhaps, it was also because I forgot that I put yourself to death without any worries and live again. At least, judging from the current results, what the old man said to himself is indeed right. He really shouldn't rely too much on foreign objects and ignore his own treasures. At the very least, if he could do it when he fought against the old man, like now, at least he won't be completely crushed by the old man's speed and strength without any resistance. The Hellfire shotgun glowed with a fierce luster in Subai's palm, and a smile appeared on the corner of Subai's mouth, but now Subai was naked, and there was no place to hang the gun on his waist. Walking to the bedroom, there were bursts of energy fluctuations coming from the front door. Su Qing also encountered a hard nut to crack. The 2 sides were still fighting fiercely, but looking at the rhythm and momentum, neither side was in a position where neither could do anything to the other. Subai calmly rummaged around again and found a large bathrobe. He put it on and tied the belt. Subai walked into the master bedroom and picked up the pregnant woman. As she walked towards the door, the pregnant woman was still sleeping, and the jade pendant was still hanging around her neck. The spiritual energy emitted by the jade pendant was enough to consume the body of the pregnant woman, an ordinary person, while she slept sweetly, and it seemed to be absolutely perfect. Good fetal safety products. Subai didn't want to think about the relationship between the pregnant woman and the old man. Now she just wanted the pregnant woman to give birth to her child safely. There were many wounds on Su Qing's body. Subai stood by the window and watched Su Qing still attacking the young man again and again, but every time the man seemed to be able to predict it in advance and take action one step ahead. In response, many parts of the man's body have undergone mechanical transformation, like an artificial human being. Subai could understand those who strengthened their bloodline, but it was difficult to understand the behavior of transforming their bodies into robots. The rest of the bloodline was actually fine. They could still look like human beings and experience the feeling of being human, but the transformation after becoming a robot, it is equivalent to changing the way of life. Just imagine that touching a woman is no different from touching a steel pipe, and eating an apple is no different from eating a stone. What is the meaning of such a life? Su Qing glanced at Subai, who was standing in the window watching the show, and cursed, "What are you looking at? Why don't you come and help me?" Subai was a little surprised and said, "I thought you would mind if I disrupted your fair duel." Su Qing laughed angrily, "If you want to be lazy and watch the show, just say so, don't make any excuses." Subai nodded, walked out of the room, and then handed the pregnant woman to Su Qing. Su Qing knew that Subai was worried that both of them would leave the front and back rooms, giving opportunities to people who might be hiding deeper, so she took the pregnant woman out. Immediately, the pregnant woman was picked up. The pregnant woman was also an adult, and most women gained weight during pregnancy. The weight was not light, but in Su Qing's hands she was like a larger rag doll, not weighing much. Xian took the opportunity to check his microphone at this time. At the same time, a stream of data flashed through his eyes. He took a few steps back in shock. He had already checked what had just happened at the back door through the camera on the street at the back door. Before, Xian couldn't be distracted when fighting Su Qing. When he saw Subai killing Guo Cheng and Sun Hairan alone, he almost collapsed with fear. How could he fight? Is this still necessary? Subai turned his head slightly and looked at Xian. When I was young and first came into contact with computer games, I thought how great it would be if I could become a hacker. I could make plugins and change data by myself. Now that I have grown up, I have seen that real products are even more extreme than hackers. I suddenly feel that living like this is quite boring. Xian took a deep breath, then solemnly took a step back again, placed his left hand on his chest, lowered his head, and then began to slowly retreat, obviously intending to leave and unwilling to continue fighting. Su Qing's eyes showed a strange light and asked, "Why, you don't want to eat the fat that reaches your mouth?" His enhancements are all in the parts on his body. To him, those things are treasures. To us, they are just a pile of scrap metal. They are harder to come by than your pair of axes. Why do you want them? Moreover, he is not an easy character to get along with. That makes sense. Su Qing nodded. Then we can't live in this place. Let's change the place. The teams are fighting fiercely now. It is estimated that the stronger teams already have babies or pregnant women in their hands. We are safe for the time being. It is enough for a team to have one baby, and there will be no reward for taking more. Therefore, there are probably teams that do not have babies or pregnant women, that is, those second and third-rate teams. Such teams are not suitable for Subai and Su Qing. It is said that it is not very difficult to deal with. In fact, there may not be many teams similar to Guo Cheng's level. Subai and Su Qing took the pregnant woman directly to the suburbs and lived in a farm. This farm was already abandoned. It was obvious that the investment failed and could no longer continue. However, it saved Subai a lot of trouble. The farm did not have electricity. And there was no food, except for the company of densely packed mosquitoes among the weeds, and nothing else. The pregnant woman was placed on a wooden bed with good ventilation around it. Su Qing stood beside the bed, while Subai sat at the door with a grass stem in her mouth. They had also checked the area around here before. There were no cameras and there were no cameras. There are not many people around, and the concealment is good. Even if other teams do come over, with Subai and Suqing taking turns standing guard, it will be difficult to make any surprise attack. Hey, it looks like I'm really worried that she won't have a baby yet. During the mission time, Suqing was a little worried about this. There are still a few days left. Let's wait and see. According to the main mission of Terror broadcast, one child is born every day. It has only been 2 days. In less than 3 days, there will only be 3 children at most. The rest of the team should have all pregnant women. We can't leave this pregnant woman alone and grab other pregnant women. If that doesn't work, we can only induce labor on the last day. After listening to Subai's words, Suqing nodded. You go and rest, I'll stand guard. After speaking, Suqing grabbed the eaves with one hand and jumped directly onto the roof. Subai walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. His skin in the mirror became smoother and more delicate. It seemed that he really didn't need to use any cosmetics in the future. There was a nail rake hanging next to the sink in the bathroom. It was a bit rusty and old. Subai looked at the nail rake, then stood in front of it, exhaled gently, and then clapped it with his palm. Subai clearly saw that his palm melted away the moment before it touched the sharp point of the nail rake, revealing 3 blood holes in his palm, just enough for a few nails of the nail rake to pass through. Haha, interesting. Subai moved his hand away, and his palm immediately returned to its original state. In the past, his body passively withstood the damage and then recovered. Now, his body has an instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. This is a qualitative change. Standing in front of the mirror again, Subai began to arrange his clothes. Then, under his control, the right half of his face began to turn into blood, and then the right half of his body began to turn into blood, but the left half it's still business as usual. Raising his head, Subai looked at the ceiling. His whole body turned into a pool of blood and started to go up along the wall, and then seeped upward through the tiny gaps into the ceiling. Suqing was sitting on the roof, looking around at everything going on. But he didn't notice that behind him. Subai, who is slowly condensing everything. It's so quietly. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 250. When Subai completely condensed her body, Suqing seemed to finally sense something, and slowly turned her head. When she saw Subai standing behind her, her whole body trembled, looking very incredible. You. When an assassin is quietly approached by another person, it means that half of the assassin's cards and confidence have been directly taken away. Can an assassin who cannot be absolutely vigilant and unexpected still be called an assassin? It was just like a cat whose tail was firmly stepped on by a person. It seemed that it could still jump up with a roar and scratch people with its claws, but it was obviously a bit lewd. Subai slowly opened his eyes, looking a little tired. He put his hands on his hips and just looked at the surrounding scenery, as if he was walking here casually. But the sky is so big and the farm is so big, how could he just walk there casually? The roof comes up, and there's no ladder here. What do you mean? Suqing looked at Subai and kept flipping a dagger in her hand. I'm telling you, you are provoking this, an extremely serious provocation. I just ate some canned food and came out to eat. You continue, you continue. The scenery here is really nice. It's a pity that I stayed there for the second half of the night and lost sight of the scenery. Subai laughed, then turned over and jumped off the roof. He didn't try again and it turned into blood and dripped from the gaps in the roof. Suqing took a deep breath, and then sat cross-legged again. There was some contemplation in her eyes, and perhaps more, she was internally hurt by Subai's previous actions. 4 days have passed. During these 4 days, the pregnant woman woke up several times, but she was always in a daze. It should be because she slept too comfortably under the nourishment of the jade pendant for a long time. When she woke up, it was more like saying he was just talking in his sleep. He didn't ask where he was, let alone where his husband was. He said some irrelevant words and continued to sleep. However, Subai still chose to take off the jade pendant from the pregnant woman's neck in advance and gave it to Su Cheng. No matter how good the product or the best tonic, he was afraid that one too many would be too much. The pregnant woman was obviously too comfortable by the nourishing effect of the jade pendant. Well, most people may not have a few times in their lives to fall into the perfect sleep of dreaming of waking up as soon as they open their eyes. However, pregnant women feel like this these days. It is a kind of relaxation of the whole body. This is also because she is an ordinary person, so the jade pendant has a greater effect on her. However, there are still less than 2 days left before the mission deadline. In fact, tomorrow night, or to be more precise, the evening, should be the end date of the mission. It seems that there are still 2 days, but in fact it is only 24 hours. Just a little bit ahead. A doctor in a white coat was taken out of a suburban hospital by Su Cheng and tied up here. His treatment was not very good. He had no food or water for a long time. With the lessons learned from the last time, Su Cheng paid great attention to preparations this time. When she was not on duty, she basically wandered around nearby places and stole some surgical equipment in several places. The woman is indeed very careful, and it is indeed very hard to get it back together with the doctor. Subai was quite leisurely these days. He was not as busy as Su Cheng. When he was on duty, he had nothing to do but make baked potatoes or play self-mutilation in the bathroom. Now, it's time to think about how to induce labor. It's too late. Do you really think she will give birth in the last hour of our mission? Su Cheng said, standing next to Subai. Subai shook his head, stepped forward, and placed his palm on the neck of the pregnant woman. Through the instinct of the vampire, Subai could sense that there was another life in the pregnant woman's body that was constantly emitting the breath of his own blood. However, the child's breath puzzled Subai a little, and it was a bit mottled. Perhaps it was because he was about to be born. Subai had never experienced such a thing, so he was not very clear about these specific details. Actually, it's really only a day or two, Subai said. However, it is not stable. If labor is induced, it is not impossible. Healthy pregnant women usually choose cesarean section in the 39th week of pregnancy, because at this time, the fetal organs are in principle they are mature, and there are fewer chances of emergency cesarean section when experiencing labor pains, water rupture, etc. Babies born during this period are less likely to suffer from various diseases than babies born by cesarean section at 37 or 38 weeks. Therefore, the expected date of delivery not old enough to have a cesarean section after 38 weeks of pregnancy. Going to check online again, Su Cheng smiled slightly. Yes, Subai nodded, and then said, but I always feel that there is a number of days in the world, or this number of days belongs to the control of the horror broadcast. If the amniotic water does not break or the pregnant woman starts to have regular labor pains, I always feel uneasy if we have an early cesarean section. Su Cheng understood what Subai meant. If you want to take shortcuts in front of the terrorist broadcast, you may face punishment from the terrorist broadcast, or it is more appropriate to call it a joke. Therefore, some things that are often done in the real world, such as many pregnant women in the family will choose to have a cesarean section on an auspicious day in order to proactively determine the child's birthday. But in this story world, babies mean life and death, and everyone is well aware of the bad taste of horror broadcasts, so they are very cautious about it. Subai sat down on the steps outside the door. There were weeds all around. The room was tidied up a little by Subai and Su Cheng, but outside the room, Subai and Su Cheng didn't have the time to tidy up. They just settled here. Days are not about reopening the farm. Su Cheng walked behind Subai. It's not too late to make a decision now, otherwise, we will be too passive. What Suching means is that if they perform a caesarean section and give birth to the child, no matter whether there is an accident or not, no matter whether the child is alive or dead, at least they still have one day to deal with the situation, such as, to fight for the baby. Squad of babies. If in the end this pregnant woman has no intention of giving birth tomorrow, or if she goes for a caesarean section at this time tomorrow and the result is a stillborn baby, then the two of them will not even have time to make the final desperate move. Excellent listeners are all gamblers with good psychological quality. In the world of stories, sometimes a gambler's spirit is really needed. Moreover, everyone will subconsciously leave a hole card for themselves, or leave a hole behind. People like Subai who often overturn the table without leaving any escape route are still a minority among the minority after all. In fact, according to Subai's intention, he would prefer to take matters into his own hands rather than resorting to such means that may go against the wishes of the broadcaster. However, Suching's attitude is already very clear. She is unwilling and afraid to put everything on the line. Perhaps, in her heart, she still feels that guarding a pregnant woman is not as practical as guarding a real baby. No matter what the result of this caesarean section is, she will have another chance to fight on her own. Let's have a caesarean section, I don't want to take a gamble. Suching's words had already been made very obvious. Subai closed his eyes and finally nodded. Aren't you coming in? Suching asked. I'll just relax outside, Subai said. Suching turned around and closed the door. Immediately afterwards, Suching threatened the doctor. Then, the sound of some instruments colliding was also heard. This place, at this moment, seemed to have turned into a black clinic, where an extremely irregular and precious caesarean section was being performed. Subai stretched out his hand, pulled off a grass stem, put it in his hand and kept folding it in circles. In fact, he didn't feel much anxiety or worry in his heart. He just felt that the weather, which should have been refreshing in autumn, suddenly became so depressing. The wait is indeed long. Even if Subai and Suching are not relatives of this child is related to their lives. From a relationship perspective, they may pay more attention to this upcoming child than their parents are taller. But for some reason, Subai just couldn't get nervous. About a quarter of an hour later, Subai stood up and moved around. At this time, the door was pushed open from the inside, and Suching walked out with a quilt in her arms. A wry smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. The normal process would make the child cry, right? But now it seems silent. Could it be that it was really a dead baby? Suching looked at Subai with a complicated expression. Want to take a look? Dead baby? Subai asked. Suching shook her head and nodded again. At this time, the doctor who had been tied there for a long time came out in a panic. He almost knelt at Suching's feet. I did the surgery, and I promise not to tell anyone about it. Please let me go, please let my family go, I beg you. The doctor began to kowtow to Suching continuously. This should be Suching's own business, and Subai also guessed the method she used to force the doctor to submit. But, what happened to this baby? Subai reached out and pulled off the quilt. There was a baby lying inside. It was not very active, but still breathing. It was not a dead baby. But, why did Suching? Immediately afterwards, Subai immediately discovered something abnormal. There was something else next to the baby. Subai pulled the quilt away more, and another child appeared. Twin. But they are not twins in the ordinary sense. The heads of these two children grow together, and their head positions overlap. They are conjoined twins. Doctor, how long can this child live? The doctor looked at Subai, kowtowed to Subai and begged for mercy. These conjoined twins have been delivered because there was no plan and you didn't send them for examination before. They may die in a few hours. They may die in one day, or they may live and grow up together. These are all possible, and there are precedents. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 251. What should pregnant women and doctors do? Su Qing looked at Subai. At this time, Subai was sitting on the steps holding the child. It had been almost half an hour since the child was born, and the smell of the conjoined twins was getting worse and worse. The weaker it is, it seems that it is a miracle to be able to survive tonight, not to mention that it will last until tomorrow night. As for supporting it until tomorrow night and the end of the task time, Subai does not have the confidence, and very little. This directly presented the same problem to Subai and Su Qing. Previously, they were worried about whether the pregnant woman could give birth before the end of the mission. In the end, in order not to give themselves any time to react, they decided to have an early cesarean section. However, after waiting after the baby is born, the original worries have not changed at all, they have just changed their form, but the essence is still the same. That is whether this child can survive until tomorrow night, and whether he can wait until the two of them complete the task and get tickets to ride on Noah's Ark. In the past, I was worried that the pregnant woman would not give birth before the time limit, but now I am worried that the child will really die in silence before the mission deadline. I'm asking you, Su Qing said again. Subai shook his head. Just leave them here and ask the doctor to send the pregnant women back to the city. Although the world is about to be destroyed, at least it can give them a chance to see their relatives for the last time. I stole someone's child and now I have a heart, Su Qing joked. You're very annoying, Subai said seriously, it's really annoying. You. Su Qing smiled slightly, are you blaming me? Don't bother, Subai said these two words lightly, and then continued to look at the conjoined twins. Then he shook his head, unless there is something like a treasure of heaven and earth and a medical skill around him, someone very tall, otherwise it will be difficult for this kid to survive tonight. Isn't this good? We just have time to make the last-ditch effort. What if she comes out of the mother's body a day late? Subai asked. You also agreed to the cesarean section just now. I don't mean to blame this matter on you. This is our team's fault, and there are only two of you and me in the team, so maybe the way I spoke caused you to misunderstand. Then what do you think we should do next? You go and think of a way to keep this child alive as long as possible. I'll go look outside, Subai said and handed the child to Su Qing. I think it's more appropriate for me to go, Su Qing reminded that she was an assassin. If she found a team with a baby, it would be better for her to steal it. The problem is, right now we don't have much clue about where the other teams are and which teams already have babies in their hands. Comparatively speaking, stealing can be regarded as a simple job. How to find those people, it's a technical job, and you've never been smart enough. Haha, can you tell me not to be so direct? Subai raised his head and pointed at the moon that was already exposed in the night sky. Time is limited and I cannot be tactful at this time. Why do I feel like our team is going to have internal strife now? Let's wait until we get on the boat before starting the internal strife. If we can't get on the boat, there's no point in it. After Subai finished speaking, he pointed at the two conjoined twins. Take good care of him as much as you can. What if a miracle of life really happens? If they die in infancy, notify me on your mobile phone. Su Qing nodded, I understand. Subai said nothing more, turned around, walked into the outskirts of the farm, and disappeared into the long grass. At night, if you are in the countryside, the night should be quiet, but in the city, the night also has its own night life. When the advancement of science and technology and the advancement of social productivity have separated many people from the routine of working from sunrise to sunset, the night seems to have lost the peace that has been given to it for thousands of years. The food stall street is very densely populated. Whether it is the shop owners or the customers who come for late-night snacks and drinks, the street is bustling and lively, even though it is already 1 o'clock in the morning. Men in coats stood in front of a barbecue stall, ordered a lot of skewers, told the boss to pack them away, and then sat at a table on one side to wait. The man was still holding a can in his hand. Milk powder. About a quarter of an hour later, all the skewers were grilled. The boss divided them into several plastic bags to put them in. The man paid the bill, got up, and walked back with the full skewers. Little did he know that behind him, there was a man wearing work clothes with oil stains on his body, holding a liquor bottle in his hand, and followed him in a blink of an eye. The man in front walked into the alley, and the man pretending to be a drunkard followed him in. After a while, the man in front turned into an alley, and the worker pretended to be a drunkard staggered forward, and a dark figure appeared in front of the man pretending to be drunk. Behind him, his neck was twisted, and then with a twist, there was a sound of bones breaking. The worker pretended to be drunk and fell directly to the ground, his head tilted at an exaggerated angle. So relaxed, it doesn't look like he's dressed as an audience member. The man carrying the milk powder can came out again, squatted down, and started groping around the man's body, a wrench, an old-fashioned watch, and a payslip. He should be an aborigine. Just to be on the safe side, the shadow that made the move immediately turned around and left. Here, you should go back early, it's the last day, it's the safest thing to be on the safe side, don't worry too much. When the two people disappeared, the body of the drunken worker lying on the ground began to twist, and the head began to turn into dynamic blood. Then, the head regrouped and became its correct position. Sudbai stood up and held his forehead with one hand. At this moment, he felt like motion sickness. His whole body was nauseated and he could vomit. His body could turn into blood and recondensate. This was a new ability that Sudbai had gained recently, and it was also a kind of opportunity, but Sudbai didn't fully grasp it, or it could be said that some of the side effects were yet to be explored. In the end, Sudbai, who still couldn't adapt, simply sat on the ground. After about half an hour, Sudbai finally regained consciousness, and the hazy and dizzy feeling in his head finally disappeared. Standing up, Sudbai wiped the sweat on his face with his clothes, and then walked in the direction of the person who had shot him before. The further he walked, the deeper the alley became, and Sudbai became more cautious. In fact, even Sudbai himself did not expect that he would be able to discover clues within a few hours of entering the city. The man was all over the block taking pictures of the closed shop doors and anxiously asking if they were there. There was no milk powder, there was a lot of noise, and it looked extremely anxious. Ahead, there is a row of shanty towns below the front of an old mid-rise apartment building. Many of these shanty towns are illegal buildings owned by residents on the ground floor and are basically rented out to migrant workers. Not far in front of Sudbai, a shed was brightly lit. Some people were chatting loudly and some were drinking wine and toasting. It was very lively. They must have brought the kebabs and started eating. However, Sudbai, who was standing behind the telephone pole, did not rush to touch it, but continued to stand where he was. His head still hurts a little, but this is not because his neck was broken before, but because Sudbai is a little unsure about the things in front of him. That's not right. Sudbai shook his head. You are frantically calling the supermarket to open in the middle of the night to buy milk powder. After struggling for so long to buy milk powder, you go to the night market to buy kebabs. Sudbai muttered to himself, and then retreated, not choosing to enter. When Sudbai walked out of half of the old neighborhood, he suddenly thought of something. He returned to the place where he was attacked. If his memory was correct, after he was killed, the person who killed him and the person who killed him were the same. People carrying milk cans are not walking the same path. Two people walking in opposite directions. Sudbai chose to search in the opposite direction that he had followed before. In fact, searching like this was not very effective. After all, the old apartment building was like briquettes. It had countless households packed in. He was looking for one without any clues. People seemed to be looking for a needle in a haystack, and Sudbai didn't know whether his guess was correct or not. However, While walking, Sudbai suddenly asked about the slightly pungent smell. He squatted down and started looking for it. Sure enough, he saw half a bunch of grilled leeks not far away. The image of the man carrying the kebab bag and throwing away food while walking appeared in Sudbai's mind. Keep looking. In front, Sudbai found another bamboo stick with oil stains on it that had not dried up. Even Sudbai himself felt a little ridiculous. He actually followed 4 or 5 bamboo sticks to the bottom of a unit building and went to walking up. There were no bamboo sticks for several floors. When he reached the 5th floor, Sudbai saw a bamboo stick falling outside the door. Sudbai put his hands against the door, and his whole body turned into blood, seeping through the cracks in the door. After entering, I discovered that this door and these walls were all meshed to minimize noise. Moreover, Sudbai also found a lot of things hanging on the walls, and many corpses were nailed to them and embalmed, but these people seemed to have died in the past few days. Sudbai regrouped his body in the dark living room, and in the back bedroom, the voices of 2 men could be heard. You go to the living room to eat? The child was finally coaxed to sleep by me. Don't wake up to your smell again later. I will be exhausted. TCH, do you have the nerve to say, how about we switch? You go outside and bring people over, and I'll take care of the children. Okay, it's almost over. No one took the bait today. Brother Sen said that we can attract another wave during the day tomorrow. Tomorrow is the last day. Those teams that don't have babies in their hands will be completely restless and better to take the bait. I must have been unlucky tonight and didn't catch any of them. Anyway, the harvest has been pretty good these past few days. I've probably caught nearly 10 listeners. Brother Sen and the others eat meat, let's drink soup. Anyway, we don't expect anything good to fall into our hands. The only thing we can do to join this team is to run errands and make fish hooks. Sudbai, who was standing in the living room, suddenly felt a chill on his back. He was really glad that he didn't rush into the shanty house where the lights were on and the crowds were buzzing. Obviously. There's a trap there. I've already tricked 10 listeners. This team is so humming talented, they actually made a fortune through this method. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 252. Lu Sun's article Medicine contains a main description of human blood steamed buns, mainly to express people's ignorance and feudal superstition under the specific historical background at that time. It has developed to the present and extended to another level of meaning, such as media reports. When a child drowned while swimming in a reservoir, his family carried the body to the government gate to demand compensation. The title of this news could also use the word human blood steamed buns in a general sense, metaphorically using the blood of one's own relatives to regenerate the child. Make some money. And now, what this team is doing is equivalent to drinking steamed buns with human blood, deliberately sending people to wander outside, deliberately attracting listeners who are trying to find babies or pregnant women, and then in this community, without leaving unexpectedly, the brightly lit shanty house that Sudbai saw before was a very cruel trap. It was specially used to receive visiting listeners, and the bodies of the killed listeners were hung in the community. In another house, the nearly 10 corpses on the wall are trophy display cabinets. Of course, children are actually taken care of here. The mesh structure on the wall can isolate the sound of children crying from the outside to the maximum extent, which plays a very good concealment role. In water margin, Sun Erniang, the mother Yaksha, opened a hotel with Zhongqing at the cross slope of Mengzhou Road to sell human flesh. What this team did was even worse. At least Sun Erniang took the bait willingly, and this team did it deliberately. To lure those listeners to please enter the urn. At this moment, Sudbai really felt that there were many talents in the audience. The forest was big, and there were really all kinds of birds. Whether they were those who could wait for the elegant hall or the low class, everyone could serve for the benefit. Subai has also encountered telecommunication fraud from listeners, which is the best evidence of it. However, in the story world, it is indeed a bit too low level to focus on robbing other listeners and still enjoy it, no matter how tall, short, fat, or thin they are. Subai also laughed at himself. He actually still had the heart to evaluate the level of other people's actions. There are two people inside, one is responsible for attracting bees and butterflies to make fishing bait, and the other is responsible for taking care of children. The team members who can be assigned to do this kind of task are obviously among the lower ranking members of the entire team in terms of strength and status. It is difficult to deal with them. Subai was very confident about them, but it was still difficult and even impractical to kill them without making any noise. After all, although the interior of the house had been renovated, it could only be isolated. Sound cannot isolate energy fluctuations. Therefore, Subai did not choose to take action directly. Instead, he continued to stand in the living room for 2 minutes. An escape plan began to emerge in his mind. The route was also planned by himself. After grabbing the child, Subai did not intend to return to the suburbs to look for it. Su Qing, as long as the child is in the hands of one of the team members, the entire team has completed the task, so there is really no need for everyone in the team to stand together holding the baby. When Subai finished preparing and was about to enter the bedroom in the back room, a man's exclamation suddenly came from the bedroom, "What's going on? Why is the child's body temperature so low?" "What? No, I said you were eating barbecue here, how could he not smell it, wake up and make a lot of noise?" He passed out of shock. "Wait a minute, let me see. How's it going?" "It's not that the shock has passed, it's that he just died." "Dead? How is that possible?" "He is indeed dead, we are finished." Subai, who was standing at the door, heard the conversation inside. Instead of leaving, he pushed the door open and walked in. Two men were sitting beside the bed with a look of surprise. They looked at Subai, but neither of them acted rashly, nor did they subconsciously pick up the baby. From the looks of it, the baby is indeed dead, and they have no intention of fighting for a dead baby now. "Get out of the way, let me take a look," Subai said. "Sorry, I can't." A man stood up. Long green hair began to grow on his body. He didn't know what kind of beast it was. It didn't look like a werewolf. "Since he's dead, why don't you show it to me?" Subai asked back. He still felt that the two men had noticed that he had entered the house, so he just directed and acted in the drama and notified them at the same time. Teammates came over to help. "If you can't, you can't. My friend, you really can go find the baby somewhere else, because our team is also going." The man in animal form stared at Subai with an unkind look on his face. The other man was holding the child, his face was ashen, not out of fear of Subai, but in fear of the outcome before him. His responsibility was to take care of the child, but the child died suddenly and inexplicably. What should he do? Talk to those people in the team? Get away? Subai took out the Hellfire shotgun and shot the guy in front of him directly. The barrage ejected from the Hellfire shotgun directly swept the beast-turned man into the corner. He was not dead, but the beast-turned man was still alive. His body and skin were already pitted. Subai didn't bother to kill anyone at this time. He just moved forward quickly and snatched the baby directly from the hands of the unconscious man. For Subai, he didn't need to rely on breathing and heartbeat to tell whether a person was alive or dead, because he could sense the blood condition in the human body. This baby, with stagnant blood all over his body, was already dead. A dead baby cannot be used to submit tasks. Subai threw the child directly to the man in front of him, turned around and left the room. Perhaps, this is the bad taste of horror radio. You are here desperately eating human blood steamed buns, constantly relying on this baby to attract those listeners to trap and kill. But, in the end, the baby in his hands suddenly died suddenly. Even if he made a fortune from these 10 listeners, it would still be a dream in the end. If the main mission is not completed, he will not be able to get the ship by then. If you vote, stay in this city and be destroyed together with it. What's the point of all this? When Subai just left the community, several powerful energy fluctuations suddenly came out of the community, which could be sensed. Several stronger listeners in the team would react after learning that the baby had died suddenly. How furious, they gained a lot in this story world, but if they failed to get out alive in the end, it would become the most ridiculous humorous satire. Taking out the phone, except for a few 10,086 messages and 2 missed sales calls from Ping and Insurance, there was no message from Su Cheng. So, it meant that the pair of conjoined twins were still alive. A kind of hope suddenly rose in Subai's heart, that is, if the horror broadcast of a seemingly healthy baby can make you die suddenly, will the conjoined twins who seem to be unable to continue to support themselves, will they die suddenly? Create a miracle? This seemed to be in line with the aesthetics of horror broadcasting, but Subai did not dare to place all his hopes on the aesthetics of horror broadcasting. Stopping, Subai stood on a certain floor of a dark office building, lit a cigarette, and had a panoramic view of the old community diagonally downward through the glass window. Those energy fluctuations had gradually subsided and disappeared, but Subai didn't think they would spend the night quietly, because compared to himself and Su Qing who had been staying in the suburbs, this group of energy had been entrenched in the city. The team should have more information in their hands. When the baby in their hands suddenly dies suddenly, what will they choose to do? In fact, it is self-evident. Subai saw 2 cars driving out of the community. The 2 cars were very close to each other. When they came out, they did not turn right onto the main road. Instead, they chose to turn left into the small road together. The car in front of them flashed, the light blue halo should be a listener who is using his or her abilities to do something. Subai threw the cigarette butt on the ground and stepped on it with his foot. He turned over and went down several floors, following the 2 cars from a distance. The speed of the car is not very fast, because there are many illegal parking on both sides of the road, so the road is not very spacious. At the same time, they seem to be planning something and are not in a hurry. This also created a good tracking condition for Subai who was following him. About 20 minutes later, the 2 cars turned into an alley and stopped. This area belonged to a group of nail-biting households, surrounded by tall buildings. There are several rows of old-fashioned buildings in the building. Obviously, if nothing else happens, there should be a team hiding here. The 3 people got out of the 2 cars respectively, then disappeared directly into the darkness and sneaked in. Subai walked over, opened the passenger seat of a car, and got in. Sitting in the driving seat was the man who had turned into a beast in front of Subai. The man's body had been hastily bandaged, but blood was still flowing out. He didn't care much about Subai's appearance, nor was he surprised. In fact, he also reached out and took a pack of cigarettes and handed them over. "I know you will follow, and the captain also said you will follow." Subai smiled, adjusted the seat and put it back. The man lit a cigarette, the cigarette butt flickered on and off, and then suddenly said, "Do you think we will succeed?" "I don't know," Subai replied. "I think we are already halfway there." Subai was stunned for a moment, then suddenly realized, and then took the initiative to take out a cigarette from the cigarette case. "Haha, it's very good." The man also laughed together. "I'm a misophobic person, how could I eat skewers and throw them on the ground at the same time? By the way, do you usually like fishing?" Subai shook his head and slowly sat upright. "Oh, no wonder. Anyone who really knows how to fish should understand one thing, which is to change the line set and hook according to different fishing conditions." Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Long. Chapter 253. Blue particles appeared in the car, like suspended dust, giving it a dreamlike feeling, but in the next moment, they turned into extremely terrifying biological weapons. In fact, every particle was a blue bug, very ferocious, like an evil spirit from hell, carrying boundless resentment. Subai finally understood what the blue light in the car that he saw when he was upstairs was. Before, he thought it was someone casting a spell to search. In fact, it was someone setting a trap for him under his nose. I actually went up, probably because I was too confident. The insects began to connect one by one, and screens of light began to form on their bodies, blocking Subai like a net. At this time, the man who was sitting in the driving seat also opened the door and got out of the car. Next to him, stood the man who had been taking care of the child before. The man was chewing gum. There was no trace of the panic when Subai broke in, and he looked very calm. "Are you tired?" Liao Qiu. Liao Qiu looked at the pits on his arms. These were all thanks to Subai's previous shot. His orc-enhanced attack power was not strong, which was a weakness, but his defense was still quite strong, but he was still beaten. One shot created a hornet's nest. Liao Qiu was very jealous of that gun now. With those two guns in hand, his weakness of insufficient attack power could be made up to a large extent. If you're too sleepy, there's no need to bring it out to make a second layout. Liao Qiu looked at his companions beside him, smiled, took a few steps back, tried his best to retreat into a visual black spot, then shook the cigarette box, took out a cigarette from it, put it directly in his mouth and started chewing. In the car, Subai did not act rashly at first. These blue bugs were not creatures in the pure sense, but undead creatures, which were completely condensed from death energy. Subai could clearly sense this. Yes, after all, his own bloodline is also dark, so once he uses brute force to break free, these blue bugs will explode directly, and the impact of pulling them down is likely to cause great damage to his soul. At this moment, on the eaves, a man with hollowed-out eyes was standing there steadily holding a bone bow. He had no strong aura or special temperament, but a blind listener, actually chose the bow and arrow as his weapon, which is a very magical thing in itself. At this time, the blind archer began to draw his bow and nock an arrow. "Ah!" A loud shout came from the void. The blind archer let go of his arrow. The arrow was just an arrow. There was nothing too fancy. Because he was blind, there was no need for any embellishment. There was no light, and it looked very primitive. However, the biggest feature of this arrow is its speed. The arrow quickly came to Subai in an instant, directly pierced the front window of the car, pierced Subai's chest, and broke Subai's heart before shooting through the car and into the patient's heart. Deep in the road. Accurate, direct, and fast. This scene was so fast that even Subai found it unbelievable. His heart was shattered, and his whole body was like a machine that had its power source removed. A song from Miao territory sounded faintly, with a pure and wild atmosphere. The blue bugs that were originally covering Subai seemed to be stimulated at this time, and began to burn automatically. The blue flames, like it was a creature with self-awareness, desperately trying to burrow into Subai's body. The flames roasted his body and burned his own blood. Subai's face was twisted in pain. "Why do I think we don't need to go to such trouble to set up traps to kill those listeners who want to steal food?" the man next to Liao Qiu said as he threw another piece of chewing gum into his mouth. "Troublesome, just to get the maximum value at the minimum cost. Now it's just the main mission one. Do you know what we will encounter next? It is the stupidest thing to make the battalion full of wounded soldiers now." The car also began to burn, and turned into a pile of scrap metal at a speed visible to the naked eye, leaving only the frame of the car, which had been burned out, and two Hellfire shotguns were still left in the car. All other traces no longer exist. "Is it over?" Liao Qiu murmured to himself. From the first time he saw Subai to the conversation between himself and Subai, scenes appeared in Liao Qiu's mind. Many details seemed very strange. It's small, but it can reflect a lot of information. Yi Mole, prepare the second arrow. Xiao Yishan, you can release another batch of insects to prepare for hunting 5 dogs. It's time for you to come out and do what you should do. Liao Qiu, who was weaker in strength, became the one giving orders in the team. What was even more strange was that the 3 strong men in the team started to execute what Liao Qiu said without saying a word. Yi Mole has already set up his second arrow, aiming it here, ready to shoot at any time. Around him, a layer of cyclone automatically emerges. This is a sign that he is gathering momentum. He can transform the momentum from abstraction to image. It can be seen what kind of state his archery skills have reached. Xiao Yishan is a thin man wearing a green cloak. Next to him, a group of red bugs have appeared. Xiao Yishan holds a jade flute and starts to play. These red bugs are beside him. Dancing gracefully, this is the dance music of death, because these insects only exist in the legends of gods and ghosts in Miao territory, and are basically difficult to find in reality. The red-faced Lai Wujiao also staggered out at this time. He was obviously drunk, holding a big knife in his hand. He looked drowsy. He continued to scold Liao Qiu. Walking forward, when he approached the scrapped car, his eyes suddenly became serious. It was burned too cleanly, not even a bit of bone or residue was left. There is indeed a problem. Lai Wujiao's voice was a bit hoarse and harsh, so even though he didn't speak loudly, his companions around him could hear him. He should be an enhanced vampire, and his level is not low. When he entered our house before, he turned into blood and sneaked in. Although Yi Mole's arrow shot through his heart, it should not have caused real fatal damage to him. However, Xiao Yishan's insect flame should have done a lot of damage to his soul. When hunting 5 dogs, be careful of cars. After all, he should be feeling very uncomfortable now, but he is a conceited person and a somewhat arbitrary person. According to the character he showed in his previous words and actions, he probably will not be hurt at this time and knowingly be surrounded. When you choose to escape, you will instead adopt a counter-attack posture to prepare. Everyone pays attention to whether there are special shadows around them or whether there are traces of blood. The street lights here are just decorations. It is up to you to illuminate. The man who was previously responsible for taking care of the child nodded slightly and spread his hands. A moonlight slowly rose from between his eyebrows, flying higher and higher. This was not a very bright light, but it was a light that made people feel it is very comfortable to see things and the light feels clearer. Haha, is there any need to make such a big show of it? Is this person mentally ill? At this time, won't he not think about how to run but also want to fight back, Lai Wujiao said with some disbelief, and at the same time, his knife edge penetrated the car. Inside, with an exertion of force, the ruined car frame collapsed into the air, and on the ground under the car, there was only burnt black ground without any trace of blood. He really gave me the impression of an overconfident psychopath. Liao Qiu took the initiative to come over, squatted down, and touched the ground on the road with one hand, wiping away a layer of black dust. However, soon, a manhole the cover appeared in the field of vision. Liao Qiu's fingers fumbled around the opening of the manhole cover. There was no dust there and it was very clean. Liao Qiu frowned and immediately looked behind him. Ji Chan, be careful. If Liao Qiu remembered correctly, there was another manhole cover where he was standing before. The whole body trembled suddenly, and she subconsciously looked to her side, but she didn't find anything. However, at the next moment, Yi Molei's arrow changed its aiming direction and aimed at Ji Chan. The batch of red bugs on Xiao Yishan's body turned into dots of red light and quickly approached Ji Chan's place. Xiao Wujiao suddenly raised his knife, concentrating his energy. Everyone's attention turned to Ji Chan. Obviously, If Liao Qiu's guess was correct, if that guy didn't intend to escape but still chose to fight back in this situation, then he would be the most likely and the most likely to take action. The suitable target to attack is the weakest and unprotected Ji Chan. Ji Chan was almost frightened to tears and was a little at a loss. It seemed that Subai would appear behind him and attack him in the next moment. Really? Subai took action. Boom! The manhole cover was overturned, and a fountain of blood appeared. However, the place where the blood appeared was not the manhole cover next to Ji Chan, but the manhole cover in front of Liao Qiu. The blood directly wrapped around Liao Qiu. Lai Wujiao subconsciously drew his sword and was about to cut him down, but he still stopped. He knew that if he slashed with his sword, it would be difficult to say whether the other party would die or not. Liao Qiu would definitely be dead. The blood quickly condensed, revealing Subai's figure. Subai's face was pale and he looked in very bad condition. However, he held Liao Qiu's neck with both hands and pressed his whole body against Liao Qiu's back. He blew gently into Liao Qiu's earlobe and said in a deep tone that was either due to weakness or intentional. "You know me." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 254. The brief contact and the rapid changes showed that Liao Qiu was a person who had a high level of control over details and a deep understanding of people's hearts. Even his psychological analysis of Subai was so thorough. It is indeed not simple. Maybe, when Subai dressed up as a worker and followed him, and Lai Wujiao came out of the shadows to kill people, Liao Qiu knew that Subai was not dead yet, so he deliberately threw the skewers on the ground while eating them, and then luring Subai over. The dead baby might have been a real dead baby. In short, everything from the beginning was just a trap, and Subai, who had an overly good mentality, stepped into it step by step with self-righteousness. Unfortunately, the behavior of a madman cannot be analyzed with too rational thinking, especially for a madman like Subai who also has a high IQ. When he realizes that every step he takes has fallen into the rhythm designed by others, after that, if Subai still doesn't know how to change and adapt, it will no longer be self-righteous, but stupid and ignorant. "You know me." After Subai said these 3 words, he deliberately blew on Liao Qiu's earlobe. Liao Qiu's face turned red instantly. Obviously, he was very dissatisfied with this overly intimate and gay behavior. Not used to it, this also proves that he is just an intelligent human being, not a robot with no feelings or perceptions. "I know you so well, you shouldn't be willing to kill me, right?" Liao Qiu quickly calmed his breathing and asked. "Auntie, you really understand me so well. You didn't threaten me not to kill you, but begged me not to kill you." Subai subconsciously hugged Liao Qiu tightly, and Liao Qiu's breathing became difficult for a while. This time, his expression changed. The redness is purely due to physical reasons, a bit of chest tightness. "Because threatening you is just a joke with my life," Liao Qiu said with difficulty. "I would like to ask if your team has any live babies." "Yes," Liao Qiu said truthfully, "otherwise how could we be so busy hunting others?" "Can you?" "Can't refuse so directly. You caught me, not our entire team. There is no way that other people in the team would give up their own chance to complete the main mission for my life. You should be very clear about this." "Hey, kick my 2 guns over here," Subai shouted to Lai Wujiao in front. Lai Wujiao walked over calmly and kicked the 2 Hellfire shotguns towards Subai, and the guns fell at Subai's feet. "It seems that your status in your team is pretty good. Your teammates returned the 2 guns to me without blinking." "I just rely on my brain to make a living," Liao Qiu replied. "It's better than pretending." Subai reached out and patted the back of Liao Qiu's head, then stretched out his hand to push. Liao Qiu took a few steps forward and returned to Lai Wujiao. Subai bent down and picked up the Hellfire. The shotgun was placed on his waist. Liao Qiu turned around and pointed at the set of accessories on Subai's body. "Actually, I like the set of accessories on your body better." It can actually turn into blood and move with you, but these two guns can't. Xiao Yujiao's energy gathered again. Yi Molei also drew his bow and arrow again and aimed at Subai. The red flying insects on Xiao Yi's shirt were arranged in the sky on one side, ready to go. Subai took his time and coughed a few times while covering his chest, then turned around. "Wait a minute," Liao Qiu said. Subai stopped and remained motionless. "Do you have a baby in your hands?" Subai hesitated for a moment, then nodded, "But he's about to die." "Well, I can guess it. How can I put it, buddy? Believe in the miracle of life. According to the information I have received now, there are only 5 teams with confirmed healthy babies, and there are still 2 places. I don't know. Of course, there are still a few teams with pregnant women, but looking at the time, it is already the last day. Theoretically, only 1 healthy baby can be born today, so the number 7, according to as for the habit of horror broadcasting, you should stick to it and implement it. You don't have to think too much." Haha, Subai laughed twice and disappeared into the night. Lai Wujiao looked at Liao Qiu with some confusion. He didn't believe that Liao Qiu was the kind of good person who was easy to talk to. If the other party let him back so generously, he would deliberately not pursue him because he wanted to return the favor, and he still wanted to kill him. Shared a valuable message with the other party. Liao Qiu reached out and touched his neck, and found a pool of blood. Then, the blood began to evaporate and soon disappeared. Lai Wujiao finally understood. "I'm not sure if the blood he left on my body will have the same power as a remote-controlled bomb, and I don't know if it will hurt me. Theoretically, his bloodline shouldn't be strong enough to control the scattered blood to attack level. However, from an emotional point of view, I dare not risk my life. It looks like we won't be able to eat this mouthful of meat." Liao Qiu murmured to himself. Yi Molei put away his bow and arrow and jumped off the eaves. Xiao Yishan also fell from the air. There were 2 clumps of bugs under his feet, supporting him to float. Of course, he could only float. It was impossible to use this method. Flying quickly in this way, those are just bugs after all, not flying dragons. Ji Chan, who was still in shock, also came closer immediately. He really thought he would be the one being attacked. He is not afraid of death, but we are afraid of death. This is the essential difference. Although Yi Molei is blind, blind people often have more delicate hearts, because ordinary people use their eyes to observe time, while blind people have to use their eyes to observe time. Feel and experience the world in your heart. This kind of person is quite interesting. Liao Qiu looked at everyone in his team and said directly, "This time, we can finally call it a day. Our team has no injuries or casualties. This is already the biggest advantage. Take a good rest during the day and wait for the main mission." 2 coming. In a taxi late at night, Subai was leaning on the back seat, his face covered by the hood of his coat. He looked very quiet, even a little dead. He was very weak now. Yi Molei's arrow and Xiao Yishan's spirit insect flame all caused great harm to Subai. Even the essence and blood deliberately left on Liao Qiu's neck at the last moment also belonged to Subai's origin. After all this trouble, although he escaped, his overall condition was reduced to only 10 or 20% of what he was at his peak. He was really too weak to look good. But no matter what, I finally came back alive. In the story world, as long as you are still alive, you are qualified to sit at the gambling table again. The taxi driver turned back to look at his passenger several times. He always felt that the passenger behind him seemed to be dead. He was very scared. Why did he feel this way? But every time he really planned to stop the car to check, sometimes, the passenger would move slightly at the right time, as if just to tell him that he was not dead. It's a long way from the city to the suburbs, which is a big job for a taxi driver. After arriving at the location, Subai paid the money, got out of the car, and walked towards the farm while coughing while covering his chest. At the same time, you should also look around to make sure you are not being followed. All in all, very tired. Before leaving, I told Suching that I would try my best to steal a child back, but now it seems that I still think too simply. It's the last day. Who can have a child? Which team is the most fuel efficient? It is indeed a bit unrealistic to steal a baby that the team depends on for survival by oneself. Of course, when they set off, neither Suching nor Subai really had much hope in their hearts that they could steal one back. There were a lot of mosquitoes in the farm. Subai walked through the grass, and mosquitoes kept being disturbed by him. Fortunately, mosquitoes were not very interested in cold-blooded animals like Subai. In front of him was the farmhouse, a small second-floor building. When Subai approached the house, he suddenly felt a chill and his whole body shivered subconsciously. Immediately, he stopped. I felt a little surprised. If he didn't steal the child, but his hometown was raided, he would really lose his wife and lose his troops. This business is such a loss that I'm going to vomit blood. In the hut, there was a vague ghostly aura permeating the air. Suching was an assassin, how could she bring out the ghostly aura? Subai approached the house silently, and then, on the steps at the door of the house, Subai saw Suching sitting there with her child in her arms. If Suching was okay, then it would be okay. But what's going on with this ghostly aura? Suching also discovered Subai. Her reaction was much slower, and she seemed to be much weaker, causing her own mental weakness. Or maybe she was holding on and waiting for Subai to come back. You are finally back. Child, is he dead? Subai asked. Suching shook her head. Originally, I was going to die. Originally, what does it mean? I don't dare to let him die, at least, I don't dare to let both of them die. I once assassinated an Onmyoji and read some of Onmyoji's secret books, so I used my memory to treat these two children. Otherwise, both of them would surely have died. Subai pursed his lips and said, "Why don't you discuss it with me?" His tone became a little more serious. Before, the two children were almost out of breath. Is there any point in discussing it with you? Suching smiled, then put the children on the steps, and fell asleep leaning on the edge of the steps. She was obviously very tired. Subai walked over and opened the swaddling clothes. Inside, there was only one child. This child had some meat stuffed in his mouth and was swallowing something. The child's face was a little livid, and half of his brother's was still attached to his head. Then, it is obvious that what this child is swallowing is the flesh and blood of his conjoined brother. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 255. The next day, the noon sun shone in through the glass windows, baking the somewhat dilapidated two-story Western-style building, making the small Western-style building look even more dilapidated. Suching lay on the bed and reached out to touch her forehead. After sleeping for a long time, her head still hurt. This kind of physical deficit could not be replenished with just one sleep. She had consumed too much from what happened last night. Where's the child? Suching got out of bed and came to the kitchen. It was called a kitchen, but in fact it was just a coal stove with a pot on it. In the past few days, the two of them only made some instant noodles or cooked some canned food. It was very simple. At this time, there are a lot of things going on, and the conditions are really not as demanding as they were a few days ago. In the cage, Subai said while cooking instant noodles. Suching was stunned for a moment, then walked to the corner of the kitchen. In the cage used by the previous owner to raise dogs, there was indeed a baby placed in it. The baby's head still had half of his twin brother's head, and there were a lot of bones and minced meat around it. He continued to eat it. The baby was actually only a few days old, but it had already grown. A small row of his teeth were very sharp, and his skin began to turn into a dark cyan color. At the same time, the eyes that he occasionally opened were also light gray. "Just leave the child in the cage, okay?" Su Qing asked. "Isn't this the result of your efforts?" Subai clapped his hands, took off the pot, and walked to the cage. Using yin and yang magic to make the child eat his twin brothers, and he was also a conjoined twin. Plus here is a newborn baby again. The effect of this evil spell has been magnified many times by various chances and coincidences. The effect is naturally extremely good. Of course, you should have sacrificed a lot of your own essence and blood to achieve it, so that's how you become so weak. This child is now a ghost baby, neither human nor ghost, completely evil. To be honest, I really didn't realize that you, the one who persuaded me to send my first pregnant woman to the hospital instead of having a cesarean section myself, and the one who used yin and yang magic to create such a freak child, are actually the same person." Su Qing looked at Subai. "I have done my best to send a pregnant woman to the hospital. I understand these propriety. What I am thinking about now is how to retain our qualifications to get the boat ticket. After all, no matter what the hell this child is now, he's not dead after all, is he? Then it depends on whether you recognize the horror broadcast or not." Subai poured cold water on him. "Forget it, it doesn't matter whether you recognize it or not. It's already 1 o'clock, about 6 o'clock in the evening, and the mission time will end. Terror, if the broadcaster agrees that this child can be regarded as completing the task, then everything will be fine. If not, then admit defeat." Throughout the afternoon, Subai didn't think about going out to do anything. On the one hand, he was injured, and on the other hand, a team of the same level as Liao Qiu last night must have tightened its defense and prepared to keep the victory. It will give people an opportunity. When it was almost 6 o'clock, the iron cage was put on the table. Subai and Su Qing were both sitting at the table. It was time to determine the results anyway. Subai was surprisingly calm, smoking alone, and Su Qing was a little nervous. Because it was her masterpiece that the child became like this. The clock says 6 o'clock. Dear audience friends, hello, I am very happy to use my voice to accompany you at this time and spend this unforgettable and wonderful night with you. Everyone should have heard the story of Noah's Ark, a very famous story in the Bible. God felt that the world he created was no longer what he wanted to see. It was full of selfishness, ugliness, and other things that he felt were very bad. Therefore, he was going to use a flood to reshuffle the cards and make the world a new one. Come once. Therefore, with Noah's Ark, because it means new hope and a new beginning. The collapse of an old order and the birth of a new one. The babies in the hands of each of your teams mean new life. This city, which has been tainted by the cat demon, has continued to deteriorate and is irreversible. Therefore, this city needs an innovation and a new start. Some teams protect the baby very well, while others ensure the baby survives. It depends on your attitude and your ideological tendency. Of course, I am happy to announce that 7 teams, after completing the mission, will receive tickets to ride on Noah's Ark. Dear listeners who have not completed the task, don't worry. It's a pity that you can't get on the boat, but being able to stay and appreciate the beauty of godlike destruction of the world is a life worth living. In short, I hope you are happy, I hope you are happy, and I hope you die well. A white light fell down, covering the baby on the table. At the same time, it also covered Subai and Su Qing. Su Qing breathed a long sigh of relief. No matter what, she finally got through it. A feeling of exhaustion came over her, which was obviously the exhaustion after relaxing her mind. Subai shook the ashes from his cigarette and looked at the child in the cage with no expression. Immediately afterwards, the baby in the cage, Subai and Su Qing rose together. They rose very quickly. They seemed to be directly supported by a pair of invisible hands and floated upwards. This was a very strange feeling. Overhead, a wooden sailboat was sailing among the clouds. Subai could see 7 groups of people, including himself, flying towards Noah's Ark. Subai saw Liao Chu's group, but not the old man. In Subai's opinion, with the old man's strength, even if one person and a team wanted to snatch a baby, it would not be a big problem. For example, Liao Chu's team last night, the old man can completely ignore the arrows of the blind archer. No matter how fast the Wu Zhao's knife is, it is not as strong as the old man's absolute strength. It is possible that Xiao Yishan's enhanced Miao Zhonggu technique may have some impact on the old man, but it only has a little impact. Could it be that the old man also failed to complete his mission, or did he die due to some accident? At this moment, suddenly, another group of people appeared below. There was also a baby beside them, and the baby still had an uncut umbilical cord. Is this the 8th team? But how could there be 8 squads? The mission shows 7 teams, so it's absolutely correct. Subai subconsciously glanced at the inhuman and ghostly baby next to him, and suddenly had an unknown premonition in his heart. The other teams also discovered this, and everyone's expression suddenly became nervous. There are only 7 team places. But 8 teams flew up. This means that one team will be eliminated from the qualification, and everyone understands the consequences of being eliminated. At this time, an old man with a white beard walked out of Noah's Ark. The old man had a kind face, but with a kind of fortitude. He looked like a Westerner, which made people think of Noah in the Bible. God destroyed the world in order to bring new life to this world. The new world needs pure babies, but does not need. Subai didn't hear the second half of Noah's words clearly. Su Qing also looked at Subai in shock. Obviously, the first half of Noah's words alone was enough for them to understand their situation, because the baby in their hands was probably not even for a blind person. It would be nice to say that he is pure. All this was just because a team was counting down the seconds, and the pregnant woman in their hands gave birth to a baby. Damn, this was so timely. Now that you have obtained the ticket, you must get on the ship, but the rules cannot be broken, but they must be broken. Choose a compromise method. Add a quota for an unqualified team, but this team only has 50% of the quota. 50%? So, for your team, isn't it just a matter of choosing one of the two? Subai looked at Su Qing, and Su Qing also looked at Subai. In an instant, Su Qing's dagger flashed and stabbed directly at Subai. She was willing to violate the rules of the team to get this ticket. This woman has been doing this for the past few days. The mental pressure is a bit too much. She already has a natural feeling of guilt about the baby. Last night, she actually used magic to make the 2 conjoined twins cannibalize. You must know that she herself has had a miscarriage experience, so Su Qing has been. It's really that the spirit has gone to extremes. If Subai is a normalized mental illness, then Su Qing was forced into a similar mental illness by the story world. Miscarriage was originally a knot in her heart, but in this story world, she had to, faced with this problem the next time, from the beginning when she begged Subai to send the first pregnant woman to the hospital to when she used sorcery herself, it proved that Su Qing had gone from one extreme to the other. Subai also subconsciously raised his Hellfire shotgun. A small team. 2 people. Just in this air. Will there be a unique spot in the duel? Many people from other teams around are also looking at Subai and Su Qing, because they are not blind and can see that Subai and Su Qing are the unqualified team that Noah said came up with impure babies. The ghostly aura about the baby was too obvious. Su Qing's face had darkened, her body was trembling constantly, and phantoms kept appearing, and she was preparing to assassinate Subai. Subai was holding onto his guns tightly, ready for battle. If you really want to fight here to choose one of the two, then go for it. Subai doesn't feel any psychological pressure at all. When faced with the chance of survival, and it is the only chance of survival, who will get involved? What are you worried about? However, at this moment, Noah spoke again. Women can give birth and give birth to new lives, so. Subai couldn't hear the rest of the words, because he was already falling downwards, while Su Ching was still in the air and began to move closer to Noah's Ark. This reason. Subai suddenly felt that he had suffered deep internal injuries. Liao Qiu also looked at Subai falling and getting smaller and smaller with an embarrassed look on his face. He touched his chin and said helplessly, "Since when has it become a crime to have a terror broadcast?" Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 256. When he fell from a high altitude, Subai was originally prepared to take some protective measures to prevent himself from being killed, even if he was a vampire. However, after falling from such a height, and his current condition was also very poor, accidentally, it is really possible to fall. Fortunately, Noah did not intentionally fall to death. After falling to a certain height, a ball of white light enveloped Subai, reducing Subai's tendency to fall, which was like giving him a parachute. When Subai stepped on the cold ground of the city again, he suddenly felt very ironic. He was so inexplicably unable to get on Noah's Ark, so inexplicably he stayed in the city that was about to be destroyed by God. It's really, you. The location where Subai landed was on the rooftop of a Wanda Plaza. Below, the lights were bright, the neon lights were flashing, and the crowds were crowded. It was quite lively, but this kind of human brain reflected Subai's loneliness at this time. Well, in fact, for Subai, it is not too negative. No matter what, he still has at least one chance to witness the destruction of the world. As the horror radio host said, being able to witness the opportunity of the destruction of the world with your own eyes is also a kind of death without regrets. At this point, Subai can only comfort himself in this way. Of course, due to Subai's character, he is not the kind of person who easily has negative emotions. Sometimes, Subai himself feels like a wolf dog, constantly pursuing things that can stimulate his spirit and brain to be extremely exciting. Even if that thing is dangerous, even if that thing may cause his death, he still enjoys it. After coming down from the rooftop, Subai simply walked into a seafood buffet barbecue restaurant inside. He chose a seat and sat down alone. He took some food on a plate and sat down to start the barbecue. Watching the prawns slowly turning red on the baking sheet, Subai poked them with a fork and suddenly felt that the prawns looked very much like himself. He didn't know how God planned to destroy the world. It was a bolt of lightning that came down to destroy the world. The city was completely annihilated, or a ball of fire came and burned it in the sea of fire. The prawn meat is very tender. When it comes to eating, Subai has good taste and skills. The simple self-service barbecue seasoning, but Subai made it just right. Perhaps this is a state, just like high-end. Even if the chef makes a simple egg fried rice, it will look different. Subai, who has been pampered since childhood, has a habitual instinct for food. This is also because a kid from a rich family like him does not need to go to work for his livelihood and future. If you worry too much, you don't need to spend most of your time struggling like ordinary people. Therefore, you can have more time to do some seemingly leisurely things. A woman carrying a black leather bag and wearing a black dress came in and sat down next to Subai under the arrangement of the waiter. Generally speaking, buffets are eaten with friends, so that the meal can be atmospheric. It's really rare for Subai and this woman to sit alone at the table and eat themselves. The woman has a very good figure, a pair of red phoenix triangular eyes, two curved willow leaf eyebrows, a slender figure, and a graceful, coquettish physique. Her powdery face shows off her youthful power, and she has an aura about her that makes people dare not offend her even though she looks a bit like a promiscuous woman. However, the woman looked at the pot and baking sheet in front of her, frowned, stood up, walked around with the plate, then sat back without taking anything, and continued to frown. At this time, Sudbai had carefully roasted 3 large shrimps. He picked them up and put them on the dinner plate. He was holding a knife and fork in his hand and was ready to eat. In fact, many people at the table around him would subconsciously look at Sudbai. He lingered for a moment, because Sudbai's eating habits were different from everyone else's. To put it simply, it was a buffet with a relatively affordable price, but it gave Sudbai the feeling of eating a high-end dish with a high B rating. And no one thought that Sudbai was pretending, because he ate very seriously and gave people a very comfortable feeling. This kind of temperament and dining feeling really can't be faked just by trying to pretend. It is estimated that others did not know that Sudbai regarded this meal as the Last Supper, so he naturally ate more meticulously and had higher self-requirements. To put it bluntly, this meal is my last meal, so I have to be more serious. The woman in black dress also looked at Sudbai, then she stood up and sat down directly in front of Sudbai. Sudbai was a little surprised, but he didn't take it seriously. He just sat down. Although this woman looked pretty, young Master Su really didn't have a good meal to vent before the end of the world. He had seen too much impulsiveness, life and death in strong winds and waves, and Sudbai was no longer so low. Sudbai finished eating the first prawn. The shrimp shell remained intact on the plate, but Sudbai took out the shrimp meat and ate it. At this time, the shrimp shell looked crystal clear and really looked like a work of art. The woman picked up the shelf on the table, picked up a shrimp from the dinner plate in front of Sudbai, and put it into her bowl. Sudbai was stunned, and the woman lowered her head slightly reservedly, ready to pick up the knife and fork to enjoy. However, Sudbai directly used his fork to fork the shrimp and threw it to the side of the table. The woman's breathing began to become very calm, and there was a hint of coldness in her beautiful eyes. Obviously, she was very angry, but her feeling of anger was not obvious. However, soon, Sudbai used a knife and fork to pick up the only shrimp left on his plate, and took the initiative to put it on the woman's plate. I didn't control the heat of that one. It was a little burnt. Let's eat this one. I'll choose something to eat. Sudbai stood up and went to choose the dishes with an empty dinner plate. The woman sat there motionless for about 10 seconds, then picked up the knife and fork and began to enjoy. Her eating posture and movements were naturally not as aristocratic as Sudbai's, but she also ate very delicately, and she has a beautiful appearance, and there is a kind of beauty that belongs to her when she eats. When he came back, Sudbai brought a lot of things and began to bake them slowly on the baking sheet. After they were baked, Sudbai gave the things to the woman who was inexplicably sharing the table with him. For Sudbai, he had no other ideas. It was just that having a good-looking woman eating with him at the decapitation meal felt pretty good. It was the last dusk anyway, and since he had no interest in turning into a beast, then just be a gentleman to the end. The meal lasted for an hour and a half, but Sudbai didn't eat much. The woman ate quite a lot in the end. Sudbai used the fruits there to mix 2 cups of fruit juice, 1 cup for each person, and sat there drinking quietly. The woman bit the straw and drank the whole glass. Then she got up and left. It's true, I didn't even say thank you. Sudbai broke out of his habit, drank kuajhen in 1 gulp, straightened his clothes, and ended his meal. After walking out of the buffet door, there was still the smell of barbecue on his body, which made Sudbai slightly unhappy. God's destruction of the world should not be so timely or so fast. Can he buy a white suit first and then take a shower? Come out in some clean clothes? Going out with the smell of barbecue, he always felt that dying like this was a bit disrespectful of his own funeral. Sudbai suddenly thought of the sky burial platform he had seen when he went to Sichuan before, and using eagles to peck the corpses to obtain a so-called purification. But in terms of specifications, the gap between that kind of funeral and the one he was about to face was so huge that they were not even comparable. A city wants to be buried with him. What a grand funeral. Notification: the team relationship is completely terminated and a new team relationship can be re-established. Reconfirmation period, within 24 hours. Team rules remain the same. A prompt sounded in Subai's mind, and he and Su Qing terminated the team relationship at this time. A green team crystal as big as a fingernail appeared in Subai's hand. Subai looked up helplessly. Okay, Su Qing is still on Noah's Ark, and he is still on the ground. Does this team relationship have any impact on him? There are only a group of losers left on the ground who have not completed the main mission 1 and are not strong enough. Does it mean that I have to find those people to form a new team? Instead of doing this, Subai would rather enjoy the beautiful scenery of the world alone. The young man in a black suit has meticulously styled hair, with the curvature of each hair strand just right, a delicate face, perfectly rounded nails, and shiny leather shoes. No matter which angle you look at him, you feel that he is already dressing up. It has been achieved to the extreme and perfection. The young man was sitting in a cafe in Wanda Plaza, with a cup of coffee and a dessert in front of him. Under the young man's feet, a pixie was crawling there. It seemed a little tired, lying on the young man's feet. Motionless and dozing. There were many people taking their dogs for a walk around, but for some reason, no matter whether they were docile or bad-tempered dogs, they did not dare to go deep into the square today, and their owners refused to get closer no matter how hard they dragged them. An old man in Chinese tunic suit came over, sat in front of the young man, picked up the coffee and drank it in one gulp. He. The young man laughed. Okay, it's really interesting. You scared me too. You turned into an old man and actually started to wear mouse suits. You used to be more mature than me. Appearance conscious. The old man ignored this and asked directly, Pilo, why are you here alone? Where is Lan Lin? She said she was hungry and went to eat. We'll be there soon. As he said that, Pilo opened his palms to reveal the team crystal. Oh, I really didn't expect that when I cooperated with Lan Lin, I didn't get it. Not only can I kill you, but now I have to team up with a guy like you.